So thank you everyone for being with us for today's discussion. This is a panel discussion, the last in a series on the future of coffee logistics, expectations and challenges. Hola Marta. Welcome. My name is Amaris Gutierrez-Rey. I'm the Director of Coffee and Roasting for Joe Coffee Company based out of New York City. I'm going to be the moderator for the session today. We're excited to have here with us today three amazing speakers. Their information is on the slide, but just to introduce them, we have Brianna Dickey from CropConex, Felipe Cam from Mercon Coffee Group, and Guillermo Grassi from edoxOnline. They're going to be our speakers for the session today, and we're very lucky to have them here. Some housekeeping information before we start, and a thank you note for all of our sponsors. Yeah, thank you. So the webinar is going to be recorded today. That should have indicated that when you join the session. Remember to please choose the language. We have live interpretation. Si hablan español, pueden escoger el globo para escoger su idioma. There's a little icons on at the bottom for interpretation. So if you're a Spanish speaker, please choose that if that's your preferred language. Spanish translation will be available live. So the discussion today is going to be a panel discussion. We're also going to have the opportunity for a live Q&A with our wonderful group of panelists. So hold your questions for the end, or if you're thinking about them as we go, please enter them in the Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to choose that and enter your question. We'll make sure to get to it at the end. So last but not least, as I mentioned when you guys were joining, please feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're joining from, and anything else you'd like to add. And we're going to get started. Oh, but first, yes, thank you. We're going to thank our sponsors. And this is a really big feat, folks who are making this possible today for everyone to connect. Thank you to CropConex, Savor Brands, Coffee Friend, and Mercon Coffee Group. And of course, our media partners, Roast Magazine and Barista Magazine. And just a quick note before we really get the conversation going. As many of you know, this is the last in a series. So we've had many great conversations already, and this is going to be a great conversation to be able to pull it together. So in the past, the last webinar we had 2 weeks ago, we discussed some concrete examples about how digitalized coffee logistics can take place for different trading businesses and service providers. So today, we're going to pivot to think about the future of coffee logistics and where we see the industry in 5 years. And our panelists have a lot of experience to be able to share their perspective on what that will look like. So I'm hoping that it will be a really informative session for everyone. Personally, I'm very excited also. So to get the conversation going, I'd like to start with Brianna for our first question. One of your main missions at CropConex is to redistribute costs so that producers can get a better economic value. So I'd love to ask you if you could share with us how streamlining logistics information is part of that process for greater equity.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. When I started to build CropConex, I wanted to create a solution that supports sustainability across our agricultural supply chains. And economic sustainability is a main component in thinking about how we create a more supportive agricultural system across the board and engage all stakeholders within that economic sustainability conversation piece. And when you start to approach technology through the lens of creating economic sustainability, you start to look at, well, what are the levers I can really pull to affect and influence the economic distribution across the supply chain. Now, you might see, for one hand, increasing the yield, being able to increase the economic value that the producer is able to capture. You might also be able to say increasing the price of the products that they're selling as one of those levers to be able to pull on for economic value. And the other one is decreasing costs. And those costs can actually come at what are the costs at the inputs of the farm level and what are the costs of the logistics in the supply chain.
Granja y los costos en la logística y la cadena de producción. Y, o sea, y lo que esto representa en cuanto a la rentabilidad. Algunas de las cosas que se ven en la cadena cadena de valor del café es que es altamente fragmentada y hay muchos stakeholders o grupos interesados involucrados en toda esta transferencia. Y esto
because of either the number of people involved or the data silos and inefficiencies that you see in the supply chain. We actually see that sometimes up to 40% of the export value of the product is absorbed in logistics inefficiencies. So when you start to think about, okay, well, how can we actually create better efficient supply chains, look at improving the logistics and the transfer of the coffee from end to end, you can then reduce those costs and redistribute it across the supply chain and back to the producers. And so if you then start to think about, well, how do you reduce the costs across the supply chain? Data is actually really that key to unlocking the economic potential. Data visibility allows you to do a number of things across the supply chain with logistics. One is it allows you to potentially reduce the delays. It increases your access to then be able to optimize your trade routes. It also allows for opportunities for automation, which can reduce the cost for the human capacity or human labor involved in the supply chain. And then it also provides better risk mitigation. So if you can make informed decisions, you can also get in front of some of the costs that we're seeing now play out in the supply chains. And so in thinking about data being this fundamental and core component of being able to increase efficiencies, reduce some of the data silos, increase the coordination from end to end, the only way that we're going to get true data visibility is if we have a fully engaged supply chain and that data is coming from all of the stakeholders across the board. So in the final component of thinking through data visibility, better economics across the supply chain, I think one of the things that I find most important in including is that in creating technology where we're looking at better supporting the supply chain, creating technology that is accessible to everyone involved, accessible to producers at the farm level, accessible to the logistics providers themselves. That accessibility is what allows for the data collection, the data visibility, and the traceability that will lead to reducing those costs in logistics.
Yeah, and you've said like a lot of things that I know are quite intense processes also, like, just the concept of data collection to make data more visible, to be able to do anything with that. That's a lot of work, I think, for companies that have pre-established systems in place already. So this makes me think like the next question should go to Felipe, because you work at Mercon, an enormous company that does a lot of really great things, but you've seen firsthand this digitalization process, so that process of data collection in order to make it visible to better inform all the other systems that you have in place. So would you be able to share with us what that process has been like and how that's being supported by your different...
sobre ese proceso y cómo ha sido apoyado por los diferentes equipos operativos en el terreno? Si todo es sobre los datos, estoy totalmente de acuerdo con Brianna.
In a nutshell, let me tell you exactly what we've been doing for the last 10 years. But basically, we created an entire culture of process automation and digitalization among the different teams at Mercon. Okay, what we did first, we replaced all email-driven data needed to create the typical logistics stuff, such as itineraries, transfer from warehouse to port, and vice versa, with key partners, especially with those with the highest levels of volumes of shipments in different countries, especially Brazil and Colombia. So we started full collaboration with them. And what? Data integration, as Brianna says, it's all about data. So what we did is we secure and developed secure web services to receive data at night. Believe it or not, we used to do that on an email basis, receiving data by the dozens, if not by the hundred. I think everybody probably is familiar with this type of modus operandi. So we receive emails, and from there we start creating all of our itineraries and so forth. So we said that 10 years ago, we started with this vision, say we need to completely eliminate this process, get away from emails. Too much work, too much errors, and a lot of work from our internal teams. So we said, let's integrate with them and work in a very smart way let's develop the algorithm. So we did, our development team developed the algorithm so that that data that we started integrating with the exporters that we receive at night, we started producing all the different tasks along the supply chain. The thing that I mentioned, itineraries, shipment samples, transfers, and so forth in a very automated way. Okay, so we did that thanks to the open collaboration with our key partners. I gotta mention as well that we develop and digitalize our KPIs. And before, they used to be done manually. It was very stressful for our team members. Each end of month having to come up with what was the on-time deliveries. Probably everybody's familiar with that as well. We said no more. We acquire a very sophisticated business intelligence tool, and we said that from now on, let the system calculate those KPIs. Okay, we use that very strategically to go directly to our clients. So we said every time we would meet with our client, we said no more PowerPoint. That's it. End of story for PowerPoints. So we decided to use those business intelligence tools and show them on a live mode exactly how we were performing against their shipments. Okay, so that was one of the things. We also developed apps for them to track their shipments, not in a live way that we would like it, but we're getting there. Okay. Also, we started secondly integrating with warehouses. Okay, basically to automate inbound and outbound activities such as vessel arrivals, support, warehouse IDs, invoices, and we did this with key partners both in Europe and North America. And talking about Vollers of the world, Pacorinis, Costa Oro, Dupuis Silo, just to mention some, also in North America. So we started using that data not only to use it in our system with the algorithms to update the system, but also we started using it to drive that data into our payment systems. So instead of getting the email, for example, and getting the invoices via email, that data started flowing for these key partners directly into our payment systems. And obviously that improve our payments, it reduced the errors and so forth. Okay. Also with the warehouses, we developed a very smart application for mobiles where we would do the reconciliation of our inventories in our system versus the inventory in the warehouses. Believe it or not, that gave us around an average of 95% automation reconciliation, leaving us just with probably the other 5% that we would need to reconcile manually. So that was a big milestone in our entire process of digitalization and automation. So now what we want to do is want to integrate with our clients. So we first started with exporters, then we went through the automation process with the warehouse, and now we say, okay, the next step gotta be that we gotta integrate with our clients. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to allow for data transfers on contracts with shipping samples, invoices, the same way we did it in the first steps. And now that that we're getting over the pandemics and all that, we'll be able to continue with that effort. Okay. Mm-hmm. Just to finish with this question, Marisa, I wanted to mention that this disruptive changes have brought along the need to change the culture among the different internal people and partners to make it work. In addition, it's very critical that the people leadership at Mercon has been extremely important to move forward. Okay.
No, for sure. It's not, you're not just streamlining systems, you're streamlining the way people are thinking about those systems. Yeah. And I have to say, like, so yeah, you're saying, I mean, this is a lot about, maximizing the efficiency of your work, but you're still having
las eficiencias, pero también
different parties internationally, which is Guillermo's area of expertise. So I'd like to pass the baton over to you, Guillermo, to ask, because of all of these document exchanges that are required for logistics operations internationally, how can digital documentation lead toward a considerable improvement for the different coffee actors involved?
Thanks, Amaris, for having us here. As you described, there's multiple documents which are required in an international transaction. But before we move to what is out there in terms of electronic documents, I think it's important that the audience understands some of the complexities. These documents, which are multiple and will allow the final release of the goods in the port, or will be required for fulfilling the payment conditions, are many and are produced by different parties. For example, the carrier will produce the electronic bill of lading, chambers of commerce will produce a certificate of origin, quality certificates are produced by supervision companies, fumigation certificates are produced by fumigation companies. There is many people working in different documents, which makes the whole execution of an international transaction complex by definition. So the way that platforms like edoxOnline can help on this, right, is often with two different elements. The first one is providing online collaboration to all those parties involved, and particularly the shippers. This online collaboration will allow, for example, to input the information which is required in these documents only once, and then administered efficiently in a digital platform. This information will be disseminated and will avoid inconsistencies, will avoid double entry of data, and obviously speeding up transactions. Um, edoxOnline, for example, allows, as other platforms, to automatize processes. And I think Felipe was talking about many emails which are often sent in execution. So with the automatization of processes, the idea is to reduce this amount of emails which are piling up in an inbox. The second way that digital solutions help is directly about the issuance of electronic documentation, which is far superior to paper in the sense that the integrity and the validity can be verified by technology, avoiding fraud, basically. There's also the opportunity to avoid expensive couriers, late couriers for bank presentations as well, which are a big problem, and ultimately convenience for the whole industry. So thank God or thank goodness we are seeing top companies like Sucafina, one of our clients, which is embracing digital solutions and little by little replacing every analog process or paper document by these new technologies.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I know this is something that, as I've read about, your work online, collaborative commerce is something that has come up a lot for your work and also Brianna's. And I think this is the moment where humanity is able to come through a little bit when a lot of these digital tools are helping with that streamlined work in the background. And so to kind of take it into this area of the conversation to talk about collaborative commerce, Brianna, the next question we have for you is, we've been seeing in the sector an extensive increase of digital services. So how do you envision, from your perspective, a future where tech providers offer interoperable services and solutions that also include logistics support? So systems that can speak to each other to allow for that better collaboration. Is this something that's easily applicable?
Yes, Felipe mentioned something that I think is really important in this conversation, and that is the cultural change. There's, the challenge of the data and then the model. And when we think about incorporating technology in these human or historically very human transactional relationships, there's two components to this. There's the technology that we're using, that we're building, and then there's the change management strategy, the behavioral economics around aligning incentives and playing on the same team for a unified vision and goal. That end goal being data actually does unlock a lot of potential for, as I previously mentioned, streamlined efficiencies, reducing costs, better economics and prosperity across the supply chain. And so when we start to approach this conversation with the perspective that we can actually mutually benefit from an alignment of investing in technology that can work well together, then I think it benefits everyone. So let's talk really briefly about that technology. When we go through digitization strategies across the supply chain. There have been a lot of bespoke technologies that's been applied for corporations. They might build a custom solution, for example. And with all of these custom solutions that are being built, there are multiple different languages, coding languages that these solutions could be built in. These coding languages then have different means of being able to communicate with itself and different means of recording the data that it is intaking. So we then have multiple different systems in multiple different languages, recording data in multiple different ways, and we then have data silos. It's no wonder why it's really challenging to have a seamless handoff process. What we often see is that a business will use a piece of technology for their business operations, but there's
Tecnología para su parte, pero entonces hay otros que están anterior a estos o posterior a estos. Entonces, ¿cómo se crea una tecnología que nos permita operar más, que sea más interoperativa? Y hay una manera de hacer esto cuando comenzamos a hablar de un lenguaje unificado, un componente de traducción unificado.
using APIs, using programming languages, where one system can transfer data and hand off to another. We have to start thinking about, well, what is the data that's being recorded? And how is it being recorded? What terminology is being used? How do we translate that from one system to another? We need to start really thinking about, as an industry, different standards that we can establish, different schemas that we can use, so that way this translation can become easier. And we even did this as an industry around the quality analysis of coffee and thinking through the Coffee Quality Institute and now the SCA cupping protocols. We have two things. One, a standard of the way that we are analyzing coffee, grading coffee, and a lexicon of flavor profiles that we can associate with the coffee. This allows each person to be able to say, this coffee is this quality and it tastes like this. So when I say that, you from across the other side of the world can understand what I mean by that. Technology works the same way. If we as an industry can start developing data schemas that can be standards, then I think it would provide a much easier means of integration. And we're seeing some standards popping up with documents, different customs documents, a lot of even food standards for importing, exporting. You know, there's a baseline there, but I think along supply chain logistics, having better data schema standards would be useful for everyone. There's also in thinking about wanting to have more interoperable systems. Concern that I've heard before is, do I really want to share my data? And how much is my data proprietary to me? And I think in thinking through that, and I might say it's maybe less about the proprietary data that we really need to start integrating, but it's the events around the data that we can start communicating that provides the contextual information about the fully traceable product, the history of the product, the transactional history, the provenance, the origin. And these events, I think, can still provide the necessary data that's can be used for logistics efficiency gains without that proprietary data being breached. So I think we can still create a system, a protective system, but a collaborative system. This has to be a team sport. Yeah, so I think in thinking through creating systems that speak well with each other, looping back to what I was saying before, the only way that we're going to get that full level of data visibility is if we have technology that is accessible to everyone. Is that if we are collecting this data at every point in the supply chain, is if we have these events starting at the farm level. So I think just as important of saying, is it interoperable? Is it accessible? And is it a democratized access to this technology? I think is just as important piece.
No, thank you. I could tell there was like a lot of in-depth stuff that you're like, how far do I go down this path? I wish we had 3 hours so we could learn some more. But what you said about, a team sport, or like, these moments where you have like data events that need to keep the process going, that can give you a lot of useful tools in itself. This made me think about this concept of a bill of lading being the actual thing that is the thing that passes the baton to get things moving from place to place. And the electronic bill of lading is a service that edoxOnline is really made possible and accessible. So I was hoping to pass it back to you, Guillermo, to ask about the electronic bill of lading, since it's a very key aspect for the future of coffee logistics, I believe. And what do you see is next steps for that process? And if you could explain it a little bit also.
Sure. I think it's important to clarify for some people the relevance of the bill of lading, which is the document of title of the woods. Actually will prove that the coffee that is floating in the ocean belongs to somebody, right? So it's a very important document. And a little bit of history about the electronic bill of lading. Even before edoxOnline launched the first blockchain technology EBL in the world, and probably the best in class. Even before there was a consensus in the industry about a scenario of a very rapid adoption of this technology. The truth is that that scenario of rapid adoption didn't take place. And what we can see so far is that only 5% or less of the total bills of lading are actually issued electronically. This is what is going on today. And there is many reasons for this to happen. Things are changing, but the main hurdles have been around a lack of adoption or acceptance from the official authorities. There has been also a lack of engagement from the private sector, particularly shippers, clients, owners, and banks, especially banks. And last but not least, there has been a lack or non-interoperability between different technology providers. For example, when you transfer money from one bank to the other, nobody believes it's magic that the money actually arrives, and that's interoperability. But with electronic bill of lading, the things have been different. There's good news also on the way, very good news about these aspects, particularly about interoperability. For example, we are participating in the two largest initiatives worldwide. One is called the Digital Container Shipping Association, and the other one is promoted by FIATA, is the EFBL, the Electronic Bill of Lading of FIATA. These initiatives have the capacity to transform global trade by standardizing processes, key processes, and among them, the electronic bill of lading. So we believe this will provide a massive traction soon. In terms of legislation, there is multiple initiatives as well. For example, the United Kingdom is discussing currently a bill about electronic documentation. There's other legislations like Singapore well advanced as well. We are seeing it happening. And last but not least, the good news are the market. What we are seeing in the market, we are seeing a massive propensity of carriers, of owners of vessels to enroll in the EBL as a solution, and also industry embracing these digital solutions, like companies like Sucafina and hopefully other coffee suppliers will be joining as well. We absolutely welcome every company that wants to be part of this transformation led by the electronic bill of lading adoption.
Amazing. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it would be so useful. So we here to try to encourage the logistics partners we all work with to adopt that practice. So we've been speaking a lot about the future and next steps. I think maybe this is a really good moment to turn it back to Felipe to carry us through, to kind of put a little bit of an end or a little, maybe like a ... to the end of the series, to talk about the future as well for Mercon. So looking at a few years from now, What's your perspective on a successful digitalization of logistics, especially with the experience that you just described for us earlier? What should we all be aiming for as an industry? Oh, I believe you're on mute, Felipe. Which is yeah, consider it, but yeah,
So
there you
sorry.
go.
So sorry. Anyway, yeah, good question, Amaris. I'll be happy to share my view there. Good stuff so far. Number one, I would say probably we need to tackle and prioritize more sophisticated platforms, not only in our coffee companies, but critically at especially at ports and the shipping lines. Guillermo already mentioned there, and also Brianna, and how the need to completely modernize that area, documentations, e-bills. And there's evidence of bottlenecks and with unprecedented cargo log jams in the last 2 years, with costly demurrage and detention charges. In a world of cancellations, rollovers in our booking structure that we all suffer to the roof, to the max. So definitely they have to completely modernize themselves. And we need to pressure them so that we can have much more visibility, and then they can act much more efficiently, and for us not having to wait 4 weeks to get just a documentation for the shipping lines or for the ports to kind of release a cargo. So I would say that's my number one. We also need more open collaborations to share data. I already mentioned it, that we started that a few years ago. It was a challenge. It wasn't easy to convince partners to start collaborating in a very safe way. But that needs to continue. We were only able to work with the key high volume partners who want to do it across the board. I think everybody would benefit from doing it as well. So that will, I'm assuming that will continue in the near future, so that it can become a standard for higher level of efficiencies. What else? We need more secure encrypted networks to fight continuing cyber attacks. That won't stop. That's unfortunately a highly profitable criminal business that will not go away. So the more secure we are, the better we'll be. Okay, we need to tackle, I would say, big inefficiencies on the as Guillermo pointed, the bill of lading. I'm always frustrated that I can believe that in this century we continue to operate with a paper, physical bill of lading, and we all suffer from that. Every time we lose or a carrier loses a paper document, and the vessel is already at the destination, and we paid hefty amounts of demurrages and detention fees. So that has to stop. I heard good news lately that finally shippers, all the shipping lines are starting to change their mindset, and they are kind of starting to accept that e-bills, electronic bills, as Guillermo pointed out, it might be the way to go. So I think we need to pressure everybody. We need to get together and start pressuring them, and also ports, even though it's going to be difficult. I heard that, for example, recent legislation in Congress upset the unions. They were upset. They knew that that was going to have a consequence on resources. So, but definitely it's the future. We need to get more efficient for the majority, right? Which brings me to and then probably the need to maximize operation resources with more automation. That's what we did at Mercon. And that definitely require for some of the existing people to relocate to other areas, because it was simple. Automation brought less human work, unfortunately, but the good thing is that we were able to relocate appropriately to different resources, so nobody would be without unemployment. Okay, so that's another thing that we need to see for the future. We also, as Guillermo mentioned, I agree, we need to decrease the number of emails, not only for efficiency, but also for healthy reasons. We all get hundreds of emails daily, and that pretty much is very toxic. And the more automation we do, the more integrations, the better we'll be. So that's something that we need to work on.
O sea que nosotros tenemos que trabajar en esto.
Another aspect that is not usually spoken, just to say, probably the last, not the least, but we need to push for a total leadership culture. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about only the teams, the logistics team, but I'm talking about CEO and board directors. They need to be the one embracing changes. They need to be the one pushing, and so that everybody gets on the same page and everybody goes for the change. It's not easy. Change management is always a challenge. Not everybody wants to leave their traditional and many years standard manual operations. So we need the support, and we need for our CEOs and the entire board of directors to embrace and help us with that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. It seems like a common theme is that shifting of a cultural perspective. I've heard the phrase, we're only as good as our digital tools, but I feel like it's not always really accurate. A lot of the time the digital tools are there and doing a lot of really good work for us. We have to change the way that we think about them to really benefit from them. And yeah, I think if there's any indication from the amount of people in this call that there's a lot of interest in collaboration and collaborative commerce. So I hope that this event in itself does encourage a lot of those positive changes that you see for us in the future. Well, thank you. I think at this moment, we're gonna pivot the conversation to include questions from our audience. So I'm just gonna check here. Oh, interesting. Okay, so here's a great question. Maybe Guillermo, this is a good question for you because of the role that you play at edoxOnline. But there's a question about automation and technology and the ability to implement artificial intelligence in coffee logistics. And the question is, will this perhaps this model allow automation to be more efficient? What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. There is a big room for automation and machine learning, artificial intelligence. It's also important to understand that for all these fantastic processes to take place, the important thing is that the information that initially takes place in a system or in a platform has to be accurate right from the beginning before we think about processing it through technology, as it could be automation. But we see in the future many processes, many manual processes being replaced by automation, as could be settling, document checking, and so on. There might be, or there is a need of determination to get on board with these technologies before we think in automation of processes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know there's also been some talk recently this week because of that article from Google, or not by Google, but in relation to Google. But yeah, there's a lot of talk about automation and artificial intelligence. I was wondering, maybe Brianna, if you would like to comment as well. I know, yeah, this maybe falls a little bit in your wheelhouse as well.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about building machine learning and in working with artificial intelligence and data sets is that you start with a model and then you have a certain series of data labeling and you have your dump the data into the model and then it iterates. It essentially is self-healing and it begins to improve with the more data that you have. And so although the efficiency gains that we might see starting off with incorporating more machine learning, it's a bit of a hockey stick where it's slow to begin with, but then we see this acceleration of gains that we can actually capture. So an interesting thing, I think that's especially in thinking through interoperability and what we're looking to do at building out at CropConex is looking at across the supply chain, the more data that we have, how can we start building models off of the data and integrate and incorporate as many data sets as possible. So integrating in weather data sets and shipping data sets and data sets along even mapping the changes that we see in harvest periods. How can we then have better predictive models? And so it's utilizing the data in a way where we are learning from it without actually taking that proprietary data and doing anything with it. So I think there's huge gains that can be captured by incorporating machine learning. It just is a matter of having the data first.
Right, you need something to be able to be analyzed first. Maybe we'll see some of that in the future. I'm not sure what companies would be integrating any of that, but yeah, I wonder. Maybe we'll see some more. Okay, maybe so this is a good question for Alejandro Padilla asks for Felipe. Which one was the most facing challenge at the moment to prepare the app for the inventory reconciliations with the warehouses?
Okay.
So the process.
And thank you for the question. Number one, let me tell you, that has been one of the most rewarding, fascinating initiatives. Just because I'm never gonna forget the day I was in a different country, and there was one of the logistics team, and it was, I think, 9 p.m., 10 p.m. work reconciliating her numbers with the warehouse assigned to her. So that was pretty much a good signal that we needed to automate there. So and it took us probably 2 years to go through, and it was to make it to the 95% level that I mentioned, and it was kind of smooth. There were different things that we needed to take into consideration that was kind of making some noise, like different unit of measures, and some warehouses sometimes works in some unit of measure. We had different unit of measures, so little thing. But I think the most difficult challenge is the following. So we designed this reconciliating tool mostly for our clients, commercial clients, and where we're used to ship high volumes of containers. Okay, but then we started with a new business unit, which is our specialty division. And in that division, it's not so much as to large number of containers, but it's a kind of a more retail where you got one container for to attend like 50 different clients. You know, that's where the most challenges appear that we're still dealing with, because you're reconciling at a very small lower numbers, and that's what you need to be careful with. It's still in progress. That's not a very kind of recently business unit, so we're trying to adapt to it. But if there's one thing that I can say is I extremely recommend and doing something like this, because doing it manually can be a real nightmare.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Okay, so we have another question that I believe, I think it might be an appropriate question for any of our panelists. I might leave it open to anyone who might prefer to answer. It's in reference to other agricultural products. So the question is, many of the challenges in the coffee industry are similar to other industries, such as sugar, grains, oil seeds. So are or have any of you in your roles been looking at learnings or solutions from other commodity industries to improve anything? Yeah, go ahead, Guillermo.
No, I think it will be perhaps interesting to provide a point. Many of our clients are grain traders, wheat, soybeans, soy meal traders, which have been working in digitalization of document and processes since the last 10 years. And as a result of that, there has been also many actions taken as an industry as a whole to standardize processes across many countries with the ultimate benefit of the whole industry. So what we can say is that where we have seen that in grain and oil, for example, there's a lot of room to apply this these benefits and these initiatives to industries like coffee, for example, where these sort of initiatives are a bit more of a recent tenure.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that really quick, and just saying that the more that we see industry-wide efforts, unified efforts into standardization, creating these common languages, the more we work together. We actually have seen in other sectors, I think, distributed benefits from that collaboration. So I'm hoping with what we see, what I've seen in the coffee sector over the past, however many years, I think there's hope and potential here. It's just a matter of rallying around that unified vision.
And probably I'd like to add that not only important learning for other commodity out there, but keep in mind that the whole world is kind of highly impacted by constant technology innovation, right? So faster internet and better GPS solutions and are there already. So and the more we use it, and the better it will be. So I think we need to take advantage. Unfortunately, it takes us a long time to adapt to them, and that's why I was mentioning the big CEO and board of directors. But there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of facilities that we can take advantage to improve efficiencies and right now, right?
And one more note on the adoption factor. Sorry, I think one of the things that's really has been useful in understanding different positioning of the stakeholders involved in a lot of these decisions. So if you think about conversations with the government sector, change management, working with the government is a very, can be a very long process in any sort of legalization process and new proclamations. And then there's the CEO factor, where each stakeholder has their own perspective of why it would be valuable, but they're usually consistently economically driven. If you can make a case for the company that you work for, or if you can make a case with the stakeholders that you have to say that there is an economic driver behind the reason for digitization, whether that is increasing efficiencies, so reducing costs, or increasing market access, increasing prices, there's a lot of different positioning, but I would say having that the data to be able to support even the economic gains you can get from a digitization strategy would be one of the most compelling talking points that I would suggest or advise. If you are working with multiple people who have resistance against technology, that positioning it that way could go a long way.
Yeah, this also reminds me of something that I can't remember if you mentioned in our practice session or I read through an interview with you, Brianna, but you mentioned inclusive economies, and I think that is this question actually kind of brings us to that definition, right? There are a lot of coffee producers are also growing other things. So anyone who wants to help maximize the income for those producers, for the supply streams where they work, because there's so many overlapping supply streams not related to like a single product, it makes so much more sense for sure. And that does actually bring me to another question then about this concept of adopting better systems for that purpose. Maybe Guillermo, you can speak for a moment about what would be the benefit to the industry as a whole to adopt edoxOnline, as you were mentioning, only some of the limitations with adoption of that. What would you think that the coffee industry could benefit from if that were to be a bigger percentage?
Sure, I think this is a bit in line of what we discussed before. I think a way to tackle the answer will be to thinking what has happened in other industries like the grain, oil and seeds industry, which is a bit more advanced on that through actions taken as a whole by the industry. And what they have seen is a massive improvement in terms of efficiencies in the execution sectors, right? Through standardization of processes, through decreasing of inconsistency, which have an impact in delayed and penalties of bank presentations, the electronic documentation saving an enormous amount of funds due to courier savings, or as we said, late presentations, mitigating the risk of frauds, of the forges documents. So there has been an enormous efficiency gain across the largest countries, exporting countries like the US, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, um, Russia, Ukraine, even countries like France. The largest companies have adopted digital technologies to unleash these efficiencies. We have seen tremendous impact, and we believe that the coffee industry can easily replicate these gains in a short period of time.
Awesome. Yeah, let's hope that happens.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have time maybe for 2 more questions. So I'm going to pose the next one to Brianna. What do you see as the role of governments in the future of coffee and digitalization?
So I, through my work with CropConex and just consulting along the coffee value chain for multiple years as well, have had the opportunity to work relatively closely with the Coffee and Tea Authority in Ethiopia under the Ministry of Agriculture. So I've had the opportunity to be able to understand the nature of how the government plays a role in supporting the coffee sector and how they make their decisions around creating supportive structures, creating legislation for the coffee value chain. For Ethiopia, for example, about 30% of their GDP are coffee exports. So it's an incredibly valuable export for that country. And so looking at providing solutions to their value chain that support the economics, the increase of the volume and the value of their most valuable export is that aligned incentive that I was speaking to. So when you think about, okay, well, what is that digitization strategy for deploying technology that can help improve the efficiencies along the value chain, taking it at that angle, there is this highly incentivized interest by the government to look at what are the solutions that could provide that support. CropConex is looking to launch in Ethiopia as our beachhead market because of these aligned incentives with the government, really looking at how to create a better system for the entire value chain from end to end. And in thinking through the legislation, the challenge, I would say, in how fast we see technology change and iterate, just some grace in knowing that even though there's this mechanism that governments have to run to be able to catch up to emerging technology, that can sometimes be long and laborious. There's still this process of, I think, in governments making sure that they are keeping abreast of what is the new technology, how can we utilize that, and how do we start thinking about creating standards, regulations, legislation that support different currencies or cryptocurrencies or different technologies, e-commerce that may require some government intervention. They just thinking forward thinking is important.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so the last question I think is a really great question to end on. Is a really wonderful note. And I'm going to pose it to Felipe, but I also hope we have a moment if any of the other panelists want to make a comment. But so Felipe, since you did such a good job also helping us foresee some of the future in terms of challenges and challenges being opportunities for growth, what do you foresee in terms of challenges when thinking about how to share responsibility for all these activities throughout the value stream?
And if I understood well, definitely we all have to share responsibilities across the board. Producers, exporters, importers, shipping lines, everybody has to collaborate. Without collaboration, it'll be impossible. And like I said, and like I mentioned throughout my answers, it took us several years to convince other partners to start an open collaboration with data integration, for example. So I feel like everybody has a responsibility. Everybody has a share in how our industry operates in the future. So if we go together, especially if we collaborate and we participate in different associations, Guillermo mentioned a few out there, and I think we're not going to be able to accomplish more. And the past few years, when I think about this, and the last few years, only a few companies that I hear have been kind of jumped to the next level and with total disruptive technologies. I think we need more and more collaboration, and everybody has a responsibility.
Thank you. Yeah, we do have a moment. Would Guillermo or Brianna, would you like to comment on that as well from your positions, your roles? No, that's okay.
I was taking a deep sigh because it is a distributed responsibility. You know, it's really easy to point the finger at one, you know, one piece of the value chain and say this is where the problem is, or if only we could change that piece. And it does require this collaborative approach and being able to say we lift each other up by working together. And so I would say, you know, in thinking the biggest challenges in sharing that responsibility is making sure that we remember that supply chains don't operate in isolation. You aren't a single unit. There is no single unit supply chain. We are fundamentally working together, whether you like it or not. And so finding ways to work together better is going to serve us all.
If I may, our takeaway perhaps is for the industries, do not wait for a technology to become a standard to benefit from it. Be an early adopter. Enjoy technology from the beginning, get substantial benefits out of it.
Beautiful. That's amazing. And I think that is a really good takeaway. Well, I've learned so much through this series. Thank you so much to you incredible panelists. Thank you to all of the participants in the audience for attending this webinar. And I'd like to also say a big thank you again to our partners, CropConex, Savor Brands, Coffee Friend, and Mercon Coffee Group, and our media partners, Roast Magazine and Barista Magazine, for supporting the event. So yes, of course, let's continue to encourage people to follow us because this webinar series is just the beginning of the conversation. At the end of November, we're going to have an online summit that'll do a deep dive into the future of coffee logistics. And I'm confident that this conversation will grow and expand as it should because it is so complex. So stay tuned for more information about that and how to join and participate. So thank you so much to everyone. Our time is up, but it was really a pleasure to learn from you panelists today. And I look forward to continuing to follow your work in the future. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.